Shūmon Kattōshū第46則三部中法書八課の無字中法の本の主曰く上州何によったかこの無字を言うこれを中法八課の字というあるいはこれを陰人道話という Entangling Vines Case 46 Part 3 Chuho's 8-word question on Jōshū's mu. Chuho Myohon asked, what was the reason that Jōshū said no? This is called the 8-word question of Chuho, or the question of why he said what he did. Welcome to this time together that we have. Having been in this mode of addressing individuals all over the globe, greetings such as good morning, good afternoon, seem really inept and are best avoided because we have human beings here sitting in Europe, in the United States, in Norway. It is quite a wide network of this human Sangha that comes together here in this Hō-On Sesshin to requite the beneficence, to pay back, to pay forward, to live what we have been entrusted with. Entrusted beyond just having all, well, we partake in this cosmic jackpot of having been born as a human being with consciousness. And here we come together in formal Zen practice. And quite often, people come to look for peak experiences. I want to have a peak experience. And you know what? Having consciousness, being able to breathe, to somehow walk on this earth is a peak experience. We all are very fortunate to have had the encounter of the Buddha Dharma manifested in so different ways by so many different people. And of course, Denkyō-shitsu Kyōzan Jōshū is what brings us all together. This place, Rinzai-ji, would not exist without the work, the tireless effort of Jōshū Rōshi, being or having been at that time the living point of the arrow of time, the very tip of that forward motion, which we all have inherited with Jōshū Rōshi's departure. We all know that he was born on April 1st, 1907. And that is as sure as is anything that's written in the sutras that were memorized and told from one person to another person for several centuries, eliminating any certainty for this date or for these words of the Buddhist teachings of being taken in any kind of fundamentalist understanding. Yes, Jōshū Rōshi was born, Sasaki Shufu, sometime in 1907. Recorded on April 1st. But as we all might have heard in Tales from Rōshi, it took his father a couple of days to walk up to the place of registration and put the name in. So we don't know exactly what the day was. However, what we know for sure is July 21st, 1962, when Jōshū Rōshi stepped off the plane at Los Angeles International Airport. This is today 21,918 days ago. A long time. A few days over 60 years and 3 days since the arrival in the United States. It is also 2,919 days since Jōshū Rōshi departed in Los Angeles. I'm sure that those of us who were there at Rinzai-ji, sitting in the afternoon, a clear day, not a cloud in the sky, and sometime between 2 and 3 p.m., lightning and thunderstruck, not only in a meteorological sense, but also in the departure of a great teacher. Rōshi spent 18,999 days in the United States, effortlessly teaching. It seemed that way. And we only will know what kind of an effort it is if we ourselves live up to these teachings of the Buddha and all the teachers after him, all the male, female, or non-gender specific teachers, even the insentient teachers that all are around us. So one day short of 19,000 days spent here for the sake of the Dharma, not for the sake of food or clothing, as we just chanted in the Kozen Daito Kokushi's last admonition. So remembering this is always a good point to make, especially today, where we will have for the 8th time the annual memorial service that will follow the close of this Hō-On Sesshin. Yesterday, we heard in case 46 in the second part, a little bit what sounded like a poem. And I spoke a little bit about what the traditional Japanese koan practice looks like. So in that context, yes, we find poems, we find capping phrases. So after one is moved forward from the main case, in this case it's Jōshū's move, a monk asked Jōshū, does a dog have Buddha nature or not? Jōshū answered, no. After that, there's the practice of providing capping phrases that are used to, first of all, of course, there's a literary tradition that came from China, but one learns that over time, and the whole finding of the capping phrase becomes like learning how to pair the right wine with the right meal so that they go together. Of course, there's a question of taste with that, and some pairings are clearly apt and others not. That's the jakugo. Another way, though, that follows in this traditional practice once you pass on from the honsoku, from the main case, is called sashō, checking questions. Checking questions that look at this main case from many, many different directions, allowing the exploration of the depth of understanding, the depth of realization, or the aptitude to illuminate and elucidate the various aspects of a koan. For Jōshū's mu, there's anywhere between 20 and several hundred checking questions, according to what lineage one studies in, and certain masters have their own checking questions. What we find today sounds very much like such a checking question. What was the reason that Jōshū said mu? Other checking questions, just to give you a flavor, some of them are, how tall is mu? When you put mu in a box, how do you bring it to me? What are the 10 mus of whoever appears in front of the teacher? So these checking questions are opportunities for this really important personal development that we have, where we as individual practitioners develop our spiritual personality, a spiritual personality that is not based upon fixation, but that is based about becoming really versatile with juggling the balls of this ever-changing world that we encounter. There's no perfection to be found in this. Balls will drop. Some are heavy and land on your foot and you go, ouch! Others just break. And if there's one thing that I can say, looking back at the path that I was able to take, my aspiration has become, all I can hope for is to fail graciously. But now you might ask, what do we do with questions like that? What was the reason that Jōshū said mu? Doesn't that sound like a big fat bait that is being thrown out there, waiting for our intellectual cognition, for the knowledge that we have accumulated to just grab it and bite like a fish, hook, line, and sinker, just for the Zen teacher, the Rōshi, or whoever we study with, yanking that hook into our cheek and them watching us flop around like a fish that was pulled onto land? I think, and I feel that when I look back at the Sanzen encounters with Jōshū Rōshi, that at times he really enjoyed seeing us flop like that. A good heartily laugh, followed by the ringing of the bell. Spit it out and try again. So why would we then ask questions like that for bait? It's an interesting question. And I'd like to try to point to some basic Buddhist teachings that can help shed a little bit of light onto questions like this. Of course, it's not the Zen people who came up with questions like that for the first time. We are human beings. We are endowed with critical thinking capabilities, cognition, intellection, and the ability to tell the difference between a stick on the ground and a snake. And that is good, especially if at night, if you walk and you see something lying there, you better know if it's a rattlesnake or if it's a stick or a rope before you step near it. But what kind of question is this? Is this a question that can really be answered? Just think about your own intentions. Can you always tell clearly, why did I say this? Why did I do this? I can't. Not always. And even then, ascribing motives to ourselves is difficult enough. It is even much more a hindrance beginning to ascribe motives to the actions of other human beings. Oh, she did this because, he did this because. We can't know. We can't know, and there is no answer. In this case, it's also getting stuck on the words. Case 46, the first part, has the full koan with Jōshū, where he's asked, and it recounts two encounters, not just the monk that asks about the dog's Buddha nature for the first time and receives mu as an answer, no, not, non-being. But also the second part where another monk asks the same question and receives u, yes, has, exists as an answer. So getting stuck on the words, it's clearly not about mu or u as a word. But what is it then? These questions go back as far as the historical Buddha. And to point at them a little bit, I want to read to you or recount a story from the Kula Malunkyavada Sutta, which is a sutra, it's called the Shorter Instructions to Malunkya. Malunkya Putta was a monk who studied with the historical Buddha Gautama. We can find this piece of the sutra in the middle-length discourses, the Majjhima Nikaya. The whole thing happens in the Jetavana Grove, you know, where the Buddha stayed with his disciples, bhikshus and bhikkhunis alike. And the disciple Malunkya Putta became quite troubled with his thinking, and not only with his thinking and his questions that he had, but also with the fact that Gautama Buddha, Shakyamuni Buddha, did not speak about what was known at that time as the 14 unanswerable questions. And these questions include questions about the nature of the cosmos, if an awakened person exists after death or not, and so on. So these questions, here are a couple of them so you can get the flavor of what they are. They are all metaphysical. Is the cosmos eternal or not? Or both? Or either? Is the cosmos spatially infinite? Is the cosmos not spatially infinite? Is it finite? Is the self identical with the body? Is the self not identical with the body? Does the Tathagata, the perfectly awakened being, exist after death? Does the Tathagata not exist after death? Does the Tathagata both exist and not exist after death? Does the Tathagata neither exist nor not exist after death? And he was really troubled because his teacher, Gautama Buddha, did not give him any answer to it. He had not spoken about it. So Malunkya Putta met with the Buddha and asked him for the answers to these questions. And more than that, he even stated that if I do not receive an answer through your teaching to these questions, I will leave the path of the Buddha. A little threat, huh? We don't know who would be actually losing in this case. Malunkyaputta was ready to renounce the teachings because he wanted an answer. So Gautama Buddha responded by first stating quite long in the sutra, so I will not read that he never promised to reveal ultimate metaphysical truths, such as those asked in these questions. And he used a story, a parable, a simile, to explain to Malunkyaputta why he didn't do it. And it's the parable of the man or the person hit by a poisonous arrow. I don't know if you remember it, if you have heard it before, but here is the short version of it. The Buddha said, "It is just as if a person were wounded with an arrow, thickly smeared with poison. The person's friends and companions, kinsmen, kinswomen, and relatives would provide them with a surgeon, a doctor, and the person would say, 'I will not have this arrow removed until I know whether the person who wounded me was a noble warrior, a priest, a merchant, or a worker.' The person would say, 'I won't have this arrow removed until I know the given name and the clan name of the person who wounded me, until I know whether that person was tall, medium, or short, thin, fat, dark-skinned, light-skinned, until I know whether he was of dark hair, ruddy brown, or golden-colored hair, until I know their home village, town, or city, until I know whether the bow which was used to shoot the arrow that wounded me was a long bow or a crossbow, until I know whether the bowstring with which I was wounded was fiber, bamboo threads, sinew, hemp, or bark, until I know whether the shaft with which I was wounded was wild wood or cultivated wood, until I know whether the feathers of the shaft with which I was wounded were those of a vulture, a stork, a hawk, a peacock, or any other bird, until I know whether the shaft with which I was wounded was bound with the sinew of an ox, a water buffalo, a langur, or a monkey. The person would say, 'I won't have this arrow removed until I know whether the shaft with which I was wounded was that of a common arrow, a curved arrow, a barbed, a calf-toothed, or an oleander arrow.' The person would simply die, and those things would still remain unknown to them. This is the story that the Buddha told to these metaphysical questions. He went on reading them as I did before. Is the cosmos eternal? Is the cosmos not eternal? Is it eternal and not eternal at the same time? And so on. And he said, I never declared any answers to these questions because they don't pertain to the core of the matter of my teaching. And that is what I can say, said the Buddha, whether or not these questions are answered. What I see is old age, sickness, and death. Having seen old age, sickness, and death, I have thus declared the truth of dukkha, of suffering, of incompleteness, of the unsatisfactory nature of all existence. The truth of the origin of dukkha, which is called samudaya. The truth of the cessation of dukkha, nirodha, and finally the truth of the path to the cessation of dukkha, magga. These are the things that I have thus declared. So it's a very important lesson. And we often have the tendency, especially when it comes to feeling what's going on with this Rinzai-zen, how do we answer a koan, or how do we answer these questions that we have about our life, about this world? And the tendency to make thinking conditional, hypothetical scenarios, and all of that is likened to that person refusing to remove that arrow that already has hit, that clearly is thickly smeared with poison, and that has to be removed by that surgeon, by that physician who has appeared, brought forth to us by our brothers and sisters. Get it out. That is what the Buddha says. Get it out. Don't worry about who shot it, what wood it is, who shot it. It's a very, very important basic attitude to the practice we are engaging in here. And to probe for that, some of the checking questions put this bait out to our intellectual part of our thinking. And if we take it, well, hopefully it is a way to see that arrow stuck in us and to realize and recognize that, well, let's not wait, but let's get this arrow out. The physician is the Buddha. The physician is anyone who teaches us. And remember, Jōshū Jushin said about his pilgrimage that he would take teachings from a 7-year-old if their experience was deeper than his, and that he would freely offer his teaching to a 100-year-old person if they could benefit from it. That is an attitude that we really want to develop in this practice. We spoke also yesterday, I spoke about immersion into the Mu Koan, immersion into these questions that drive our practice forward, that drive our spiritual path, our life forward. This great doubt that propels us to face our selfhood, to investigate it, and to resolve to remove that what needs to be removed in the sense of a blockage, to re-establish the dynamic nature of our being that tends to get stuck if we get stuck in this two-dimensional world of intellection where it doesn't belong. The practice of immersion in our practice, we can, in our life, let's not just say practice. No separation between our daily lives and practice is what we really aspire to. If it is in the formal context, like sitting in the zendo, putting on these robes and bowing and chanting, so many opportunities to completely drop ourself, our fixated idea of who we are, and to get into that openness of just being present of letting all self-consciousness fall away. Jōshū, again, I pointed to the Jōshū Gōroku, and I picked out yet another few of his sayings that I would like to share with you, because Jōshū's move and Jōshū come hand in hand. A monk asked Jōshū, when the mind does not probe the mind, what is that like? Jōshū said, whom are you probing? The monk said, the self. Jōshū said, there are not two. In other words, whenever there is self-consciousness, the mind is split into two. Duality, self and other, have appeared. Jōshū Rōshi would have said distance has appeared. When there is no self-consciousness, the mind is not even one. Where has distance gone? Not even one. Making our life our practice, not in a formal sense, but in a sense of intentionality, of dedication to every breath that we can take, is so really important. So a monk asked Jōshū about practice and said, during each hour of the day for 24 hours, how should I apply my mind? Jōshū said, you are used by the hours. I use them. What is this time you are asking about? Lastly, again about practice. Sometimes the questions come, well, there's practice and then there is the life in the real world. How can I bring this from the Zendo out into my everyday life? It's a big question that we all at times ask until we realize that it's not about the form, also the form in which it's manifesting itself. If we shapeshift into the form of an ordained person, of somebody sitting in robes on the tan, not moving, or if it's the form of the person that emerges from bed in the morning and without any difficulty turns into a person going to the bathroom, making coffee, stepping out and seeing the blue sky. It is what we need to discover, not the form that allows all of this, but what is the essence behind it? What is it that is beyond that content? So Jōshū was once asked by this high official by the name of Ma, Master, do you practice? Jōshū answered, it would be a disaster if I did. Ma said, if you yourself do not practice, to whom can you teach the practice? Jōshū said, you, and pointed at Ma. Ma said, how can you call someone like me a practitioner? Jōshū said, if you did not practice, how could you have overcome hunger and cold and attained the place in which you stand at this very moment? With tears in his eyes, the official Ma bowed deeply in gratitude. Yet, Rinzai practice also reminds us always to have a certain urgency in what we are doing. You know, there is a reason why the Jikijitsu reminds us to move swiftly, to not breathe loudly, or to sit still. It is there to remind us of the urgency that this jackpot that we have won of being born as a human being with consciousness is not unlimited. It will come to an end. We are born into a dead-end street, even if we don't see that end quite yet. And so we should be asking ourselves in this practice like a person whose head is on fire. A monk asked Jōshū, asking for help like a person whose head is on fire, what is that like? Jōshū said, be like her. The monk asked, in what way? Jōshū said, do not put yourself in her place. Wow. Isn't that person us? Before Jōshū Rōshi came to Los Angeles, Nyogen Senzaki lived in Little Tokyo. He came to the United States in 1905. He was a student of Shakusoen, the Rinzai master who first appeared in 1893 at the World Fair in Chicago in the Congress of the World's Religions, and is the first recorded Rinzai Zen master who came to the United States. Senzaki Nyogen was his student, and he came to the United States in 1905. He lived from 1876 until 1958. And I mention him because he moved in the 1930s to Los Angeles and ran his zendo there until he died on May 7th, 1958. For over 4 years, there was no Rinzai practice in Los Angeles until Jōshū Rōshi arrived and continued. And one of the people who really helped Nyogen Senzaki was Tanahashi Shubin, a Japanese woman who had a dry cleaning, a laundry business in Little Tokyo, and he lived there. And when you go back to the book from 1987, the Zen of Myoshinji comes to the west, and you look at the pictures, there is a picture of Jōshū Rōshi sitting next to Tanahashi Shubin in the garden of the Gardena house. All these connections we have are alive, even though Jōshū Rōshi has departed. And it is up to us to decide if we want to be like that person who's trying to analyze everything about that arrow that has struck us. And that arrow might as well be Jōshū Rōshi departing. Will we ask all the questions? Document what happened? Or will we be able to step forward? Experience the pain, remove the arrow, and work on the healing that we all need as inhabitants and travelers of this path that ultimately only leads to our demise. But let's walk this path with an open heart, a face that is open to greet whatever meets us on this path. With open arms and an open heart, And I'm very grateful for having been invited again to serve in this capacity of just being available to you during this session. And I heartily invite you to join the ceremony that will be in about an hour and 10 minutes, and to pour out our heart to our departed teacher, to pour out our heart out into this world so that that flow of Dharma continues generation and generation after his departure, after our departure, into the really unknown, beyond any metaphysical answers. Thank you. Take good care of yourselves, and we shall meet again.